After today, we're hopeful that big partners and others listening to this panel presentation will go back to their agencies, if it's local government or a community-based agency, and really start a conversation about making emergency preparedness inclusive of language access. We know that these disasters will continue, unfortunately, in North Carolina, as we've already seen recently with the wildfires. So I'd like us to close out the panel discussion with asking each panelist to very briefly share maybe one, maybe two items that you would suggest that agencies start with first as they kind of make their emergency plans more linguistically inclusive. So let's start back with Omar, and then we'll go to Carolina.
Yeah, I would say, to have maybe just like a little statement ready just in case, maybe just kind of fill in the blanks when, God forbid, the time comes to post something like that. I got to, like I was mentioning earlier, we did have Wi-Fi at my partner's office, and I got there and I was like, great, what do I put? Because, you want to be transparent, but you also don't want to scare people, but you also don't want to underestimate the situation. So I actually ended up copying my wedding florist statement, what they had posted, and I copied it to ours. And I'd mentioned that nobody's necessarily hurt, but I'm still waiting to hear back from some people. So just whatever that looks like to you, just having something ready so people know. And then I would also say to possibly just have some like a little emergency savings, whatever that needs to look like in your organization. That's something that we're discussing now. Um, just having like a little emergency fund for people, whether it's your car broke down or it's like we lost work for X, Y, and Z. I would say those two things are good to start off with. Maybe it's easier said than done, but at least starting to look at things and what's possible and what's not possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Omar. Carolina, do you have one or two items you'd suggest for folks?
Yeah, I think thinking along the lines of Omar as well, very practically, a multilingual emergency messaging template would be really helpful. I think that's just a very like essential. You can work on it on your downtime. Having that would be really important. Exploring a variety of crises. We know we've seen fires out west now, but just kind of taking some time to think through that kind of template messaging, culturally tailoring it. There are things that don't translate well from English to Spanish, and surely for other languages. So giving yourself some time to think critically through some of that. And then another one that I think is so important is creating or establishing, it's not just a relationship, but an intentional relationship with emergency and first responders. We know that firehouses were so important. And we also know that the people who are at the EOC are 9 out of 10 times first responders. So we need to be in their ear, in the absence of multilingual spaces in the EOC or in disaster recovery centers, JICs, whatever we want to call them. In the absence of voices and faces like ours, I think that it's really important to have those relationships so that they can advocate for the needs of our community and not just the language access component again, but really the needs of our community. So I think it's, yes, understanding that that's where we start. In order to communicate equitably, we need to create multilingual spaces and emergency settings and response. But we also need to understand the need so we can tailor the services, the action steps, and even like I don't think we think about it enough, but if our community can't participate in the budget decision making after a hurricane or the way resources are being reallocated, because that conversation is only being had in a primary language, that's a barrier. That's a problem. And yes, it's related to language access, but it's also related to the people in the room not having built that trust and relationship beforehand, or the nuance that they need to understand and navigate this stressful emergency response in another culture and another language and another context. like spend a day in the shoe of someone who's undocumented. How would you navigate emergency response if you didn't have access to FEMA, if you didn't have access to calling 211, whatever that looks like? Think about it in the lens of a different community member, and then maybe troubleshoot it backwards, and see what's missing in your emergency response efforts.
Excellent. Yeah, many takeaways from that. The simple, plain language things that you can do ahead of time, and have available in different languages, and those relationships and the inclusion in that decision making, being at the table, and being part of all of those discussions, is just important at all times, but especially during emergencies. Thank you for that. Also, then we'll hear from Laura and then Rocio.
I think along the same lines of like building relationships, also how to work around preparedness, but not only locally, but also regionally. So be in contact of other counties around you, other organizations that are in other county, because I think that was one of the pieces that was so fundamental for the region here, because a lot of those relationships were already established. A lot of our organizations already had an experience of working together, especially during COVID. So if you already have relationships, keep building those and have conversations around disaster preparedness with those other organizations, because you're going to need each other in a situation like this. So I think that's very important. And another one that came to mind just now as we were talking is like have a plan in place and how also to take care of your staff. If you are an organization and have staff, um, it was incredibly hard for all of us who were, right there. We had our own needs and our own grief and our own situations, but at the same time, we were taking care of an entire community. And I feel like a lot of us haven't still had time even to process everything that happened, because we haven't been nonstop supporting the community, not only with disaster, but with everything else that it's happening right now, especially with the Latino and Hispanic communities. So make sure you check on the people who are around you during disaster, check on everybody. If you see somebody that is just like they're reaching their limit, like tell them to go home. People need those breaks so you can come back the day after with energy. And we had to do that with our staff, because one part of you want to be there for everybody, but at the same time you have to take care of yourself too. So how we can provide those moments and those spaces for the people who are constantly there helping, so that we can make sure they can do it at a long term.
Yeah, excellent points about the regional partnerships and about taking care of each other. And it is so hard for some of us to say it's time, I need a break. So it helps for somebody else to like say, now's a good time to go take a break. So appreciate your leadership in that area and reminding us of the importance of taking care of each other during crises and after crises. So now I'll have Rocio wrap it up for us with your key kind of one or two things that you'd like to leave people with.
So I agree with all the points that have been previously made, and I will also say it was proven that the briefings transmitted in through the radio were very well listened to, and it had great information. One of the things that I was worried about was we hadn't been successful at making a partnership with community leaders from the Russian and Ukrainian languages that we know are pretty predominant here in this county. So I was set to do that, and I'll say this is a silver lining from this disaster, that now there's an intentional relationship with these leaders, and I would stress that the need to have those relationships in your counties with community leaders from top languages, and also again touching on the contracts with language service providers. There's a great deal of importance to have local language service providers because they understand the context and the situation. But now also having those regional, national, and potentially even international contracts as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rocio. And thank you to all four panelists for your leadership and for sharing your personal and professional experiences and your takeaways from such a difficult time. We really, and I really appreciate being able to learn from you. So thank you again.